Hello everybody, welcome to the latest episode of Games Up Podcast. My name is Cameron and this week is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit smaller, it's going to be a lot more informal. It's going to offer you a quick update from us on the show, which I think is a good one and I hope that you'll listen to. And it's also going to shamelessly jump on a trend, which I'll explain in a minute. Firstly, though, I'm Cameron. I'm one of the three hosts of this show. I'm usually joined quite frequently by Lewis, who couldn't make it this week due to some scheduling stuff, and occasionally joined by Loz, who is out in the wilds of Glasgow. So when he can make it in, it's sort of through a broken telegram line, and we get a signal weeks before to tell us he's coming. It's a very dodgy system. But I'm afraid you're just stuck with me this week, though hopefully I'll be able to let you know about some things either that you'll love, although you'll never play them, or some stuff you might have missed. Speaking of stuff you might have missed, let's get on to that first segment of the show. When we do these smaller episodes, I like to go over some of the topics that happened in the week just gone that you might not have caught up on because there was some other stuff happening. For example, the Shadow of the Tomb Raider reveal. Shadow of the Tomb Raider's been in a really weird place this year because it's not really followed its marketing strategy very closely. Originally, it was supposed to be revealed at a certain date, but a massive leak happened before that date, letting us know all the information about it. This week we saw a big reveal of the actual trailer on the 27th, detailing the story and how the gameplay might change, or the engine and how the game looks better than the last game. We really got the big dump of information that Square Enix wanted us to know about. Unfortunately, we knew it was going to happen for a couple of months now, and we also knew the date that the game was coming out, the platforms it's coming out on, so on and so forth. They've kind of shot themselves in the foot with their marketing here. Well, the trailer came out, and it's set to be the third of 3 Tomb Raider stories, closing up Lara Croft's origin story. It will focus on a Mayan apocalypse that Lara has to make sure doesn't happen by becoming the Tomb Raider she was always supposed to be. And it looks like a very dark game, if not tonally, certainly visually. Tonally, it's supposed to be the darkest of the series, but visually, the game looks almost horror-like. And I imagine that fans of the original Tomb Raider games might like it going back to that slightly more unnerving tone that some of the originals definitely had, although when you look back at them with their PlayStation 1 graphics, it's hard to believe that they scared people at the time. Now, alongside this big reveal, they also detailed 12 months of DLC and expansion content, which personally is not really my thing. If it is your thing, there's a image up on a lot of gaming Reddits, and you can probably just Google Tomb Raider DLC and find it. And it basically details a circular calendar, much like you would have gotten in old Mayan societies, for example, with each month outlining what's going to be happening that month and what you can expect to either be buying or be given depending on what you buy up front, i.e. a season pass or so on and so forth. I think this is really interesting because Square Enix have seen massive success with Final Fantasy XV, and they've been able to push that game from being a game that should have come out and done well to being a game that's come out and seen post-release support for nearly 2 years at this point. It's damned impressive, but you can see it start to bleed into other games. I get the feeling that Square Enix is expecting a similar level of success here, and we've known that Square Enix have been a bit more than unrealistic with their sales predictions for Tomb Raider before. I hope that this DLC plan, this year ahead of us, doesn't hurt the franchise, because whilst I'm not the biggest fan of them, it is undeniable that the Tomb Raider Origin reboot has done wonderful things for the franchise, not just in video games, but you think 10 years ago basing a Tomb Raider game on anything like this would have been unheard of, especially as it wasn't all that far away from the silly Angelina Jolie movies where she's dancing about in stupid silver catsuits. But now, Tomb Raider has a totally different identity. It's looked at totally differently within the gaming space, and it's influenced quite a number of games. And I'd like to see it continue past the Origins trilogy, but I do worry that Square Enix's expectations for it might limit that somewhat. Alongside this, another story you might have missed only happened in the last couple of days. It's being hinted online by a gentleman called Mike Ibarra that a Microsoft Mixer show is being worked on that will allow him and Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, to AMA, ask us anything or answer any questions from the Xbox community. This may seem like a small, inconsequential piece of news, but I actually think it's really, really important. Microsoft's had a very, very weird year this year, especially with their business and their studio structure. We don't really know what they're shooting for, we don't really know what their plan for the year is, and we certainly don't know how it's going to look come E3 or after E3. Opening themselves up to the community and being able to, if not answer, at least hear some of those questions is a really good way to show that whilst they may not have a solution that they can point to right now, certainly they don't have a solution that we know about, they are listening. This may sound silly, and I'm sure it sounds like I'm doing a little bit more defense than they need. But one of the things that Sony absolutely nailed this generation is the attitude that they're listening to their consumers. That when a consumer says, I want Crash Bandicoot back, they go, well, hey, we got Crash Bandicoot back. And it's something that Microsoft has struggled with for a while. Phil Spencer has done a better job, undeniably, but there's still a little bit of the old atmosphere there. There's still a little bit of the old regime creeping into Microsoft's strategy, and this could be a good way of sending it out. Now, for the minute, it's just being talked about as a single show, but personally, I'd like to see this become a series. I'd like to see Phil Spencer as the head of Xbox be a much more front-facing kind of head of the platform. I'd like to see him be held a little bit more accountable, and a lot of people will say he is held accountable, but oftentimes when he responds to tweets, for example, or puts out statements, they feel very marketing-y. I'd like it to go a little bit more back to basics, like it was when the Xbox One was struggling to get past its original reveal, and I'd like it to feel like there was a genuine conversation happening between creator, publisher, and consumer. It's a bit blue sky thinking, but I think that is when the gaming industry is at its best, when there's a back and forth, an actual conversation, because I think that's what games do better than any other medium. So, this might be a step in the right direction, and I hope it proves to be so. What it will actually prove to be is far in the future, and we'll talk about it when it happens, but keep your eyes peeled for it. Another small piece of news that might have slipped you by is the release of Nintendo Labo. Nintendo Labo came out very recently, and while we were skeptical of it at first, it turns out that people are actually really quite positive on it. And something that I've been surprised and impressed by is how much people have actually already managed to do with it. The piano is something I'm seeing used especially to create new kinds of cardboard instruments. I've heard about it being used in a couple of school situations. But the thing that's impressed me most is I watch a lot of YouTube. I'm particularly fond of the platform. That's why we're here. And I've noticed a great deal of YouTube creators using a Nintendo Labo to recreate their theme tunes, for example, or to create silly memes, for example. If you'd asked me at Labo's reveal if I'd thought the platform would be able to do something like that, or have that flexibility, I'd have probably looked you in the eye and said, no, I don't think so. But it turns out it kind of can, and it might be a lot more flexible than we gave it credit for, which is exactly what we said we wanted it to be. So Nintendo might have actually hit the ball out of the park here. Now, it's still to be said, there's some problems with the platform, I would argue, and how much longevity it has will be something to be discussed in the future, but I've been pleasantly surprised by how Labo can be used and how people are choosing to use it. So, if you were skeptical at all, go and have a look at that. Maybe the Labo is right for you. And before we get into our topic of the week, I want to give you an update from the show. Firstly, we're on episode 97 this week, which means that in 3 weeks we'll reach episode 100. That would be kind of mental if we hadn't been doing this for 4 years. We started originally posting every week as part of a radio show. This was originally a radio show, and we then went on to be a podcast. We then went on to be a YouTube podcast, and then we joined iTunes. And we started doing this weekly fairly recently, and we've kept up at it. And firstly, thank you. We've had more people jump on board. Still not huge, but I like what we do here. But the one thing we have struggled with is trying to sort of post as regularly as possible. Well, I'm responsible for all the editing and posting, and my internet is getting a massive boost this week, which means hopefully that next week we'll have a much more scheduled, structured release on iTunes, for example. We've had some really big issues with our SoundCloud, and apologies for that if you do listen on our iTunes. We've noticed the figures dropped off as it's affected us, so apologies for that. But it should also mean that we can post stuff a little bit more regularly, and I hope that we can start streaming things as well. Now, who knows whether we'll be good or bad at it. Being a podcast doesn't necessarily translate to the other, but I've wanted to do Twitch streaming for a long while, and I know Lewis is keen on the idea as well, so I think that'll be a really nice thing for us to explore. Basically, a couple of weeks before our 100th episode, I just wanted to say thank you, because I really love doing this, and I think Lewis does as well, and I know Loz does as well when he can get a signal through the Scottish ether to us to let us know that he can be in touch. Anyway, yeah, just thanks, and we've got a cool idea for our 100th, so stay tuned. All right. Now, the chances are this week that at some point in the last 4 days, you have run out to your nearest theatre to find out what happens for 10 years of Marvel. And you may be thinking, hold on, this is sort of shamelessly jumping on a trending topic, is it? And you'd be damned right. But whilst this week we got to go out and experience whether Infinity War was the movie we wanted it to be or not, my review is in the comments if you'd like to read it, one thing we will never get to do is experience what sounds like the best Avengers game. See, there have been a number of tie-ins to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or around the Marvel Cinematic Universe, specifically a couple of Lego games, there's been a mobile game here or there, there's been skins, there's going to be a skin in the new PlayStation 4 Spider-Man game, which actually is pretty cool, the skin at least, I'm still undecided on the game. But I've been thinking for a while, why has there not been an actual game tie-in? Why has there not been The Avengers video game? Well, and it turns out there was. The Avengers was a cancelled first-person shooter/brawler game, which was set to be released in 2012, which was the year that the original Avengers film came out. In the US and everywhere else it was known as The Avengers, and in the UK it was known as Avengers Assemble. Although the game was not tied to or based around the film, it was instead an original story that was inspired by a storyline in the comics called The Secret Invasion. Now, something might have stuck out to you about what I said about the game there, and yeah, it was first person. The way that it would work is you would play as Captain America, or the Hulk, or Iron Man, but rather than see the full character, you would see from their perspectives as you unleashed their powers, or their abilities, or their machines on the world around you. The gameplay was supposed to be co-op between 4 players who would split themselves between, I believe, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and the Hulk, and it was supposed to be playable offline and online, with teamwork being an essential mechanic. The idea was that each of the characters would be unique and have unique playable skills. So Iron Man would be able to fly, for example, while Hulk was stronger than Iron Man but couldn't fly. You can sort of see how that balance would fit into place. Think of it like Overwatch, but less objective based and more Marvel. Obviously much more Marvel. There was also a way for characters to work together, i.e. the Hulk could pick up Thor and smash him down or something like that, or Iron Man could fly Captain America into the sky and then drop him and he would land very heavily. I don't know what Captain America would do from the sky, but he could do that. You were pit against the Skrulls, who are a character from the comics and a couple of other movie universes that gets a bit complicated. And supposedly there were unlockable characters which were Black Widow and Hawkeye. There's also reports that Ant-Man and the Fantastic Four were unlockable characters, which may be one of the reasons that this game didn't ever get made. At the time of 2012, our main consoles were the last generation, so this game was originally supposed to come out on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, and it was being developed and published by a studio under THQ, who acquired the rights from Marvel Development in 2010. And after THQ's demise, they sold their properties along with probably some of the assets to Ubisoft, who then didn't make the game. There's probably a number of reasons that the game didn't get made. I can't imagine Marvel would have been all that happy with it being so differently storied to the comics. Whilst Marvel's MCU story hasn't exactly been the deepest of things, they have had a pretty tight playbook of how it would work, and I can't imagine that a video game that strays from that would be exactly to their liking. There's also a whole ownership thing about the Fantastic Four, and Ant-Man was still being written by Edgar Wright at the time, so that was a very different kind of film. And then the Skrulls, it's not really clear who owns them, where, or what films they can or can't appear in, but as it was supposed to be tied around, if not directly to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you've got to imagine that there was some kind of dispute there about who would be able to appear in the game, what the actual story of the game could be, and whether it would actually work when it got released. But of course, the biggest reason the game didn't come out is because it was being developed in 2010 and 2011, which was alongside the time of THQ's massive financial difficulties. It was also being developed in Australia. Now, we love Australia, but video games are super expensive in Australia because of the cost of importing and exporting the bits that go to make them. There is a development scene in Australia, but it's not quite as strong as in America, for example, or in some areas of Europe as well. And so the cost of developing the game was rising quickly at a time that THQ was barely able to stay afloat anyway. What this led to is what sounds like a fascinating, really brilliant Marvel's Avengers game that, due to financial reasons and likely a little bit of IP protection, never got made. But if you want to, you can find footage of what it looked like and how it played online. This information comes from Unseen64, who are an amazing video game history site. They specifically look into video games that never quite made it out into the world or that were entirely cancelled, and showing what they would have been. If you like this superhero video game, they've unearthed a number of others, including a Daredevil video game that never got made, and a tie-in game for the Dark Knight that never got made either, but they do have a great deal of footage from them. They even have some gameplay from some of them. So this is a big plug for Unseen64. Liam Robinson over there does amazing work. Go and check them out. They're really cool. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was this week's episode of Games Up Podcast. It was a little bit shorter, a little bit different, a lot more informal, but I hope you liked it nonetheless. Please stick with us, because as I said, our 100th episode is just weeks away, and we've got some good ideas for it. And other than that, we'll see you next week. If you like the show, please feel free to like it and subscribe to it. That way we can get out in front of a few more people, and we'd love that. And you won't miss anything that we post. Speaking of posting, we do that at 6:30 Monday evening every week, and much, much earlier that day on iTunes, so you can catch it at lunchtime or on your way to work, depending on when you decide to pick it up. Thanks very much. We'll see you next week. And until then, the game is, in fact... You wondered how long I was going to go with it there, didn't you? Up.